I want to introduce this segment as conversation with JT about how do we create a forever enterprise making forever LEVs. And we have 7 simple words: authenticity rules, presence leads, rider bliss follows. So this means that the most critical aspect of the company is that we just tell the truth, that everything is honest, that what we espouse, the promise we make to our customers, is always kept. And the only real leadership is based on the way each one of us acts relative to one another. And if we manage this properly, then I feel that we have the beginnings of a solid foundation for a simple, sustainable, long-term culture. My giant upon whose shoulders I want to stand upon would be Alfred Sloan. I believe he was the greatest CEO, and I believe that he built a culture that was the greatest culture in the history of auto motoring with General Motors. And then shortly after he left the stage, that culture began to shift and change, essentially from being completely focused on the caliber of the product to being more focused on how much money the company would make on each product and how fast they could make that money. Curtis certainly would like to achieve scale, and we have, with our partner Fast Radius, the ability to scale radically and rapidly if that's the direction the company pulls us in. But what we really want is a strong, sustainable company that will last, and it will be the size that it kind of informs us that it should be, and we'll be listening to make sure that we're aligned with what the truth of the Curtis company is, and imbuing each motorcycle with that truth and that context. Curtis enterprise culture is defined by 4 words: every man a king, as originally declared by our great Governor Huey P. Long here in Louisiana. And what this means for us is no one tells and no one is told. Presence leads within Curtis, so it's the actions and inactions and the judgment of each one of us and how we integrate with one another is the way in this sustainable culture that we lead one another and make one another better. Now, within such a culture, you're going to have variance of people's ideas, which is exactly what we want. Real diversity of thought. So with that, we'll turn it over to our brilliant, innovative, advanced designer, JT Nesbitt, and get a few comments from him.
In my career in motorcycling, starting in 1992, I've had a lot of professional heroes, motorcycle designers who came before me, but I also have a lot of personal heroes. The first person to ever care about what I thought about motorcycles was David Snow, who was the editor of Iron Horse magazine. The second person who ever cared about what I thought about motorcycles was Matt Chambers. The third person was Jim Jacoby, who funded the Legacy Project. And then Matt Chambers came back into my life about 3 years ago. Matt Chambers is one of my heroes, maybe my biggest supporter. What Matt has done is he's created a space where ideas are not forbidden, they're encouraged. Now, that being said, there's also a dialectic that happens after those ideas come about where Matt challenges me. And a lot of the ideas that I've had early on in this project, which I thought were really wonderful, got rejected. You very politely said, "Oh, I don't know about that." I mean, you remember the radial bike, you're like, "Oh, I'm not too sure about that one." But it's in that conversation and in that challenging that the truth emerges.
Yeah.
And that's partly due, I think, to Matt's training as a trial attorney, and the willingness on my part to accept a critique, and the willingness on his part to present the challenge, to get my work, for me to defend my work. And I think it's in that very special creative space that Matt has created with this project that the magic happens. And I'm real happy where we're at right now today, because the motorcycle is magical. All of the crazy ideas that a bureaucracy associated with manufacturing would never allow have been allowed to take flight within the Curtiss super limited corporate structure for what it is. So there really is no corporate structure as you might think of it. There's no bureaucracy. I have an idea, I go to Matt, we talk about it. Sometimes he says, I think it's a great idea right off the bat. Sometimes he needs to soak it in for a long time. All of the scary decisions that were made on this motorcycle, we worked it out internally. The great news I'm so happy to report as I sit here today is that all of these ideas have worked. Everything new, all this new stuff that's going on with this motorcycle, it's all working. And there's no chance that within a corporate structure any of these ideas would have been able to be explored. Even thinking of these ideas would have been discouraged. In other words, the discouragement of thought, of creative and individual thought, would have been discouraged. But because Matt has opened up a world that I have to justify, I think it's the key to our success. And the way that we work together is at times bristling, but because we're friends, it's been a great conversation. I've grown so much over the course of these past 2.5 years, both professionally and emotionally.
I also would say, JT, with you and I, is that there are shades of gray in terms of things that I think, I think certain things should be one way, and you may think it should be a different way. The bottom line is that JT is way better than me at most of these things, particularly that have to do with the product. So back to the every man a king concept. I mean, JT is really the king of the Curtiss One. It's really his bike. He is more like the Glenn Hammond Curtiss innovative advanced design genius than anybody alive. I mean, if there is a Glenn Hammond Curtiss reincarnated, it would be JT. He's just so gifted and talented at the things that you need if you want to reinvent motorcycling for the future with the new technology that we're blessed to have. So having the opportunity to work with JT again on this project has been absolutely the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me, and definitely puts an exclamation point on how fortunate Curtiss has been. Environmentally, the high-level idea for Curtiss is that we want to make everyone as comfortable as possible when they're in the presence of our work. So we don't want to impinge on anybody's space. We don't want to distract from anybody's capability to do whatever it is they want to do. And part of the whole design ethos that JT applied to the Curtiss, I believe, really nails that. It's a proportionate thing, it's a beautiful thing, it's not noisy, it has no carbon emissions. It's something that when you see it on the road, it's beautiful, it's attractive to people, and it's accessible, easy, simple to use. It really nails the environmental aspect.
So I'd like to compare and contrast two iconic motorcycle images. And one of those images is the one that everybody knows, and that's the Raleigh Free Vincent Black Lightning at Bonneville photograph. Not to take anything away from Raleigh Free and his daring do. That was in 1955. When you compare that to the photograph from 1907 with Glenn Hammond Curtis at Daytona Beach on a machine of his own creation. So Raleigh Free did 150 miles an hour in 1955. Glenn Curtis did 136 in 1907 on a machine that he built himself. Which of those two individuals would you draw inspiration from? Imagine what the world looked like in 1907 versus what the world looked like in 1955. I mean, in 1955, it looked a lot like this, a lot more like this.
Yeah.
But in 1907, it was a completely different place.
And from what I understand, there were people at the beach saying, "Don't do it, you're going to die." And he was like, "No, it'll be fine." And you have to contextualize that with Harleys, and the Indians were running about 35 miles an hour. So he was running about 100 miles an hour faster than they were able to run. So this is kind of the root of your brand. So speak to how having such a foundation impacts the daring nature of your innovation business model for Curtis. I mean, with that kind of a foundation, I would imagine that from your perspective, it's a sky's the limit. It's almost like you have to push.
Look, just like Glenn Curtis's foray into motorcycles ultimately led to way bigger things. So I view Curtis Motorcycles as sort of an incubator for technology and ideas and inventions. I don't think this is actually a motorcycle company. I think this is a playground to come up with inventions, and sometimes they're simple mechanical inventions that will make the world a more interesting place. I think it's incredible to think that on the motorcycle that we're building right now, there are simple mechanical things on this motorcycle that no one has ever thought of before. You'd think that after 120 years of playing around with a motorcycle, everything would have already been thought of. But what gives me hope is knowing that everything hasn't been thought of yet. Yeah. Even simple things can be new and fresh and reconsidered. I find it so encouraging that even 120 years later, after the birth of the motorcycle, there's still room for simple mechanical innovation, stuff that just hadn't been thought of yet. Simple little things that just no one had ever thought of. You'd think that everything that could have been done on motorcycles would have already been done, but not the case. Our chassis with adjustable rake, adjustable trail, that's an entirely new thing. No one's ever done that before. And what Matt has done is give me the space to come up with new things that in a normal corporate environment, I don't think those things would have even been conceived because of the way people work. So our workflow is real loose, and it relies on integrity, it relies on honesty, it relies on personal accountability.
Yeah, just personal discipline, personal responsibility. And I gotta compliment Ray Dalio in his book on principles, which has had a big effect on me. And he has a child's book that I recommend everyone to read to their kids. It's really good. But basically, what Ray said, and this is kind of the root of our every man a king environment and our culture, is that the key to success in his view, is very simple, and I completely concur, is that you follow what you love. You do what you love, and you sync that to what is true about yourself. In a sense, the Curtis enterprise culture is like a magnet that pulls people in. JT and I were talking, but when JT came originally, and when we got Curtis got lucky enough for him to come back and help us again, it was his love of the culture, and of course the synchronization of that with what is correct and true about his nature and his exceptional talents. In a sense, as I alluded to earlier, he is very much like a Glenn Hammond Curtis type. But it would be a stretch for someone within the culture to say, I will go find these people. We're looking for a CFO now, and we're looking for a head of sales, and we're looking for a purchasing agent. What we really need is for those folks to come find us. We definitely want only marriages within our company, so a sustainable culture is not going to be people coming in and out. So we're 100% focused on developing relationships, not just with our employees, our direct people that work for our company, but also for our vendors, like Fast Radius. And what I hope with them is that we'll be with them in 500 years. So they'll be making all of our production pieces long term. So what I would say is, and I go back to the work you did on the G2 Hellcat, the Wraith, the Magnolia Special, the Lincoln Project, the Bienville Project, all of those, and the Curtis One, and all the previous iterations they were all great. But the one thing they all have in common is a lot of daring innovation. So there's no question in my mind that you're like the perfect human being, the only person on the planet, the best person on the planet, to make the first romantic LEV. There are plenty of LEVs out there that'll run and you can use them, but there's only one, the Curtis One, that actually feels, that's emotional. That when I ride it, and I've ridden all the LEVs, but when I ride the Curtis, I feel so special in the saddle. The other motorcycles, I don't really feel much at all, if anything. I don't feel. I'm just transporting myself from space to space. It's more mechanized, and it doesn't really elevate my sense of what it means to be fully sentient and alive and happy. That's because of what you created here. It's so amazing. But speak to the love of innovation, because in our past I always thought we're a design house, but it wasn't until Curtis formed then we had to go with innovation, and that was one of the keys that made it so lucky for us that you would come back and give us everything that you knew, put all of that on the table, because you've given so much IP that was just stuck in your head to this project. It was quite amazing that you were even willing to do that, and it's so valuable. Particularly, all of it, the adjustable suspension, the immersion battery, the way that you manage the BMS piece, the centered power axis, which is my personal favorite, just the compactness and the narrowness of the motorcycle, the proportion you created, unbelievable. Anyway, I'll turn it over to you.
From the very first sketches that I did, before I did anything, that was a month worth of charcoal and newsprint, gesture drawings and sketches. From the very beginning, I never wanted to make an electric motorcycle. What I wanted to make was the greatest motorcycle that's ever been made. That's been the goal.
Yeah.
The fact that it runs on battery electric technology is actually way down on the list for the design brief. It's not its raison d'etre. It's the battery electric technology adds to the project. It's not the most important thing about the project.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like in spite of the fact that it runs clean, it's, you know, it's the best motorcycle. It's really not, the high level was, let's make the best motorcycle experience ever.
And battery electric enhances that experience.
That's right.
It makes that experience way better.
Yeah.
But that is not the only compelling reason for why I have worked so hard on this motorcycle, why I care so much about this project.